Thanks, everybody. Definitely was not expecting a full room in the last session on the last day of MD Expo, so we appreciate y'all being here. My name's Kevin O'Reilly. I am the Right to Repair campaign director with an organization called PIRG, or the Public Interest Research Group. What Binseng and I are going to talk about today is about the right to repair movement, right? So to start, I'm going to kind of place us within this broader campaign that's aimed at making sure that we can fix our stuff, right? Because this is a problem for y'all as biomeds, clinical engineers, HTM folks, but it's also a problem for pharma. It's also a problem for consumers. So I think it's helpful to know that this is a problem across industries, around the world, just so that you have an idea of that. And then I'm going to hand over to Binseng to talk about some of the progress and the history of right to repair when it comes to medical devices in previous years. I'll give a short update about where we are now and what's moving forward at this point. And then we'll take some questions and do all that. Does that sound good to folks? Cool, love the nods, thanks. All right, so, oh man, if I start yelling too much, I'm not used to having a mic, so I apologize for that. This is me, probably the first time I wore a suit this year. This is the second, so you're getting the best of me. As I mentioned, I work with PIRG, and one of my focuses within the Right to Repair campaign is medical equipment. So I've done research to show how, in particular, hospital repair restrictions were affecting folks during the pandemic, and kind of talking through what that issue was. And you know, I've also worked with hundreds of biomeds from across the country, with hospitals, ISOs, the like. So that's just a quick bit about me and a quick bit about our organization. Again, we're PIRG, or the Public Interest Research Group, not to be confused with the PURGE. That is, we do not endorse that in any way, shape, or form. PIRG is, you know, we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan public interest advocacy organization. So we advance campaigns that seek to protect consumers, protect the environment, advance public health, you know, advance good governance, things of that nature. And right to repair, in particular, has been a key part of that mission over the past, you know, 5 to 10 years. So let's talk about right to repair, right? I think it's founded and based really in two core principles that I think are very true of, you know, being an American, right? If you own something, you should be able to do what you want with it. When things break, we should fix them, right? So right to the repair at the core is about making sure that we can fix our stuff when it breaks, right? And you know, that's kind of a crazy thing to think about. But first of all, I know many of you, probably all of you, fix things as a part of your everyday professional life. But let's talk about back home, all right? So by a show of hands, who's fixed something outside of work, maybe at home, maybe change a bike tire in the last 6 months? Okay, good show of hands. Keep your hands up, keep your hands up. How about last month? I go down for that one. Last 2 weeks? Last week? Okay, well, first of all, hats off to our fixers. Awesome. You know, I'm pretty impressed. This is probably the best room I've ever seen as far as that goes. But I would argue that 30, 50, you know, 100 years ago, if we were to do that same exercise, hands would stay up longer and throughout, right? And part of that is because as a society, we have moved to become, you know, a throwaway society, right? Where, you know, years ago, generations ago, we fixed things when they broke. We refurbished them when they were no longer, you know, they needed an upgrade. We repurposed them when they were no longer fulfilling their original use. And only when all of those options had been completely exhausted would we throw things away. But today, it's a totally different story, right? You know, if you've got a pair of wireless headphones, all of a sudden battery's not keeping in charge, great excuse to get a new pair. Crack your smartphone screen, you know, might as well upgrade to the model. And you know, I'm not here to millennial or Gen Z bash or anything like that, right? As a proud millennial myself, it's not just because we're lazy. The fact of the matter is as software has worked its way into virtually everything we use, right? Manufacturers have used that opportunity to lock down independent repair. So that's things like service keys, that's things like requiring access to certain software and the like. And this is a problem across the board, really. If it's got a chip in it, there's a good chance that the manufacturer is trying to lock you out of it. So that has some really big societal impacts in a few different ways, right? So first of all, let's talk about the environmental impact. And I think when we talk about right to repair, often we think about the waste aspect, right? Because that's a big piece, right? We're throwing stuff away rather than keeping it. But in reality, it has impacts across a product's life cycle, from extraction to processing to disposal. So starting with extraction, right? The rare earth minerals that make our modern devices run are often mined in places like Democratic Republic of the Congo, Bolivia, and Chile, where they lead to soil and water contamination, and not to mention human rights abuses, right? But even if we do this domestically, and there's a big push behind that, right? We're trying to re-onshore chip production and all those kind of things. This involves digging a giant crater into the earth, all to extract finite resources that will run out, right? We've got to do it, but at the same time, we can't continue to do it at an unsustainable rate. We have to do it at one that's going to work. Next, let's talk about processing, right? And let's use laptops as an example. So we make a ton of laptops every single year around the globe, right? And as a part of that, right, there are big emissions impacts. So, you know, the amount of carbon that we emit into the atmosphere from producing these laptops is the same as 15 million cars running on the road for a year. So by being able to fix our stuff, we don't have to make so much new stuff. We're able to keep that pollution out of our air. And then, of course, right, finally, there's the disposal, right? And so electronic waste is not a massive part of our waste stream. And in fact, you know, as devices get smaller, you know, you've got this one thing that serves as a phone, a camera, you know, all sorts of different functions that used to be 3 or 4 different devices. But at the same time, because of all these rare earth minerals that are inside of them, it's hands down the most toxic part of our waste stream. And again, those toxic chemicals are leaching into our soil, into our water, and, you know, eventually working their ways into our bodies. So that's a huge part of the Right to Repair campaign, of the reason why we're trying to make sure that we can all fix our own stuff. But there's also just the argument of like, gosh darn it, this is my thing, let me do it, right? A little bit of consumer empowerment, as well as the fact of restoring the idea of complete ownership. When you buy something, I get to do what I want with it. And that has some serious cost impacts. So we actually just put out a report last week that found that across the country, if you know, families opted to repair rather than replace, you know, a handful of common household electronics, say $49.6 billion per year. You know, inflation has been very pesky and will not go down. So at a time when family budgets are tight, not tights, you know, this is a good way to provide some support. We need to make sure that they can fix stuff. Additionally, right, I mean, this is a survey from the EU, but it also, I think people would largely agree that people want to be able to fix their stuff. They want to be able to make it last. I know there's an old ad from Maytag that has like a washer and dryer set, and you watch as this boy turns into a man, turns into an old man, right? And the whole pitch was the idea that, you know, Maytag will outlast its competitors. They used to literally market their materials as this is going to last longer. That's not the way it is anymore. I actually just had my cousin's refrigerator turn 10 years old, if refrigerators turn years old anyways. Had a 10-year warranty the next day, like almost instantly. Had a problem, wasn't covered, had to get a new device, right? So that has definitely shifted. But it's not just household items, right? Another area or type of consumer that this affects is farmers. So these pictures of, it's very stern looking, man. As my friend Jared Wilson, he's a farmer out of Butler, Missouri, and one of the leading farmer voices in the push for right to repair. You know, farmers, in the same way with medical equipment, they don't have access to the software tools they need to fix their stuff, have to go back to the dealership, leads to big time downtime, which means they can lose their crop. Additionally, you know, it also leads to increased repair costs, right? Because there's not the competition to drive those costs down. So we actually just put out a report here that found that right to repair laws would save farmers $4.2 billion per year. If y'all are in Texas, there's actually a bill in Texas introduced by Senator Kolkhorst that would address this problem. But to tell you a little bit about Jared real quickly, this is a fertilizer spreader. A few years ago, had a problem where stopped working. What happens with these pieces of equipment is it'll reduce power output. And at that time, basically you've got to fix it before you can use it to do anything. Called the dealer out, they didn't know what to do even though they were armed with the right tools. Hauled it into the dealership, cost them probably $800 just to load it on a flatbed and get it out there. Sat in the dealership for 32 days. 32 days, and that's, you know, right during at the beginning of planting season when he needs to get his fertilizer in the ground. So he estimates he lost, you know, $10,000 to $15,000 a day when he couldn't fix that. So that's serious, and I think, you know, I think that again relates back to medical equipment and some of the things you all feel. But this idea, right, and this problem that we don't have access to what we need to fix our stuff, but we should be able to, is a global movement that's emerging, right? You'll see South Africa, India, the UK, here in the United States, Chile, all over the world. We are seeing people move and push back against this shift of repair lockdowns, which is incredibly exciting to watch. It speaks to how fundamental these ideas are. And also I think is important because that helps build momentum here in the States, even if you know, other things are happening around the world. So let's talk a little bit about a couple of the different approaches that are taken and you know, to kind of set up as well Binseng's talk here. There's really two different ways that the EU and then we here in the United States are trying to solve this problem. So for example, in the EU, what they have done is they've gone around to consumer education, right? The point of sale, if you're buying something online or in, you know, whatever the French equivalent of Best Buy is, it'll have a label with a repair score based on information that these manufacturers are required to report. And then, you know, coloring, okay, 1.5, I'm not gonna be able to fix this thing. So that's consumer education that allows them to make better decisions. And their hope is that that will drive things forward when it comes to design, make it more competitive in that way. Here in the United States, however, repair.org, by the way, that's the kind of coalition that meets to push right to repair across industry. So check them out, they're a great group. What we want to do is we want to create the environment where independent repair is always possible, right? So we want to make sure that consumers as well as independent repair shops and the equivalent across industries can get access to the parts, to the tools, and to the information, both, you know, the good old-fashioned repair manual as well as the software tools needed to fix their equipment, right? Making sure that is out there will allow, you know, independent businesses to pop up. It will enable consumers to make their own decisions about whether or not they want to try and fix something themselves or hand it over elsewhere. And so that's really at the core of our legislation that we are pushing at both the state and federal level. That's the kind of the three legs of the right to repair stool: parts, tools, and information. I say those words probably about 532 times a day, so get used to it. So right, this is a global idea. This is a basic idea. We should be able to fix our stuff. What's the holdup? And the fact of the matter is, right, manufacturers don't like right to repair. We actually did some research a few years ago that found that each of these companies included, companies worth a combined $10.7 trillion lobbied against right to repair. 10.7 trillion with a T. This is not just a case of David versus Goliath. This is David versus, you know, a battalion of Goliaths that we're taking on. And despite the, you know, the differences, right? We work for a nonprofit. We're not going to be able to hire the same lobbyists in Capitol Hill that some of these groups might be able to. Our grassroots movement is breaking forward, moving forward, and ultimately winning. So a couple ways we're doing that, right? President of the United States, regardless how you feel about him, incredibly powerful position. He introduced a executive order back in 2021 aimed at increasing competition across the economy. I didn't realize how many cuss sounds there are in that before, but right to repair was a big part of that and was a piece of that. This is the chairwoman of the Federal Trade Commission, which is our National Competition Bureau. The FTC has issued bipartisan support of right to repair. They've taken actions against groups like you know, Harley Davidson, Weber Grill, who illegally restricted repair, citing warranties, which, by the way, if someone tells you you can't fix a consumer device because of the warranty, That's not true. Magnuson-Moss Warranty Act says no. It's a common misconception, but it's just not the fact of the matter. So that's your PSA for today. But not only are we making powerful allies, right, we're winning. Last year was a breakthrough year. We passed some of the first right to repair legislation we've seen since 2012, which is when the first car right to repair bill passed, which is why you can still go to your, mechanic on the corner. So Colorado passed the first. It was a powered wheelchair bill back in June of 2022. New York followed that up with a bill that was slightly flawed. We were disappointed to see the governor accept some industry amendments that led to some carve-outs and some issues, but nonetheless a breakthrough moment to pass the first electronics right to repair bill. And then just earlier this week, I'm so excited, Colorado passed the first agricultural right to repair bill in the country. We're expecting the governor to sign it next week, right? So we are making progress. We're coming through, but clearly we're not there yet, right? As you can see, there was an obvious category of equipment missing there. We haven't broken through on medical equipment. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I just wanted to touch quickly on, y'all work with this equipment every day, so my goal was to not tell you what you deal with, right? But some of the research that we did during the pandemic was that, more than 9 out of 10 of the 222 biomeds that we surveyed from all over the country, this happened in June of 2020, so about 3 months in, they had been denied access to service information for critical equipment. And then, almost 1 in 3 had equipment on site that they couldn't fix, that was broken, that they couldn't do something about. So it was just sitting there as hospital beds filled up and our healthcare system verged on being overwhelmed. So, this is a serious thing. It hasn't gone away, even though the pandemic has, calmed. So it's a big deal. I might come back to this later, actually, as far as what you can do about it, but I'll hand it over to Binseng at this point.
Thank you, Kevin. I apologize in advance. Ladies and gentlemen, my voice is getting weaker and weaker. I spent a lot of time yesterday talking, and today I'm paying the price. Okay, so I'm going to focus on the medical equipment side and also bring you a slightly broader picture than just the United States, because there are some other things happening in other countries, and then see what you guys can do about it. Okay, so as Kevin said, what is the right to repair is the right to do anything we want with the equipment that we own, as long as we obviously don't violate the laws of the land. Okay, and in our particular case, safety of the patient is paramount. No one has any wrong impressions about that. Hey, you can do anything you want, but and then hurt the patient, right? Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the past, the present, the future, because this history is actually quite long. You may be surprised that this is over 20-some years of history here. So going back to 96, when the manufacturers were actually collaborating mostly with the service organizations, no matter whether it's in-house or independent. And when in 96, the FDA started the first quality system regulation, some manufacturers started to say, wait a minute, how about those people who are not manufacturing but service medical equipment? And FDA said, okay, this is something we need to look into, but we prefer to do it separately from the quality system regulation. And so they issued in 97 a request for comment, and then look into this thing. And in parallel to 2012, the Massachusetts state, the Commonwealth, I should say, passes automotive one. And we have also the same year, the NFPA 99 issued a revised code that has something about it. So this gives, oops, I went a little too far. So, and on this column here, you see this general right to repair, things that Kevin mentioned. By the way, for those who don't know US PIRG, How many people know the name of Rolf Nader here? He is the grandson of Rolf Nader. Just kidding. US PIRG was originally founded by Rolf Nader to defend consumer rights. Okay, and so they have a long history tradition of trying to defend public interest. Okay, so this whole thing kept going, and then 2016 FDA was pressured to make another request for comments about servicing, and then the Congress of the United States got into this and said, hey, we want a bill possibly about this thing. And then they demanded that the FDA issue a report to the Congress about this thing. That happened in 2017. At the same time, there are some movements from the legal side of the country. And the important thing here is that 2018, finally FDA issued a report after analyzing millions of records of issues that could have harmed or have actually harmed the patient, and concluded that, I'll show you in a minute the conclusions. I concluded basically there's very little justification for any specific action by the FDA, although FDA did say that we deem ourselves responsible for monitoring what's happening out there. And so in the same year, a number of independent service organizations, we are competitors to each other, we got together and we formed an alliance to start discussing the issue and try to educate the public as well as the government about this. So finally, this is the 2018 FDA report. You can download that directly from the FDA website. And the conclusion basically is here is that there is currently available objective evidence. It's not sufficient to conclude that there's a problem. They basically said, we don't know what we don't know, but what we know so far is not something that will cause us concern. So there is no particular issue that we need to concern ourselves except for remanufacturing. And we'll come back to remanufacturing in a few slides. Okay. So moving on quickly, this is still going on quite a bit. And then FDA issued a draft guidance on remanufacturing and invited comments. Many people commented, and FDA is now trying to issue a final document. This year was a promise initially for last year, but did not finish. And in the meanwhile, there are several states like California, Colorado, started to moving into the field in terms of state laws. And California, unfortunately, the bill disappeared in the Finance Committee. Literally just disappeared, evaporated. In Colorado, as mentioned by Kevin, passed, but it was only power wheelchair. Of course, no one is denying power wheelchair is an important medical device for those people who depend on it, but this is just one single type of medical device. And also, the Congress had some people, congressional leaders trying to introduce a clarification to the term remanufacturing, and had a lot of controversy there. And so many things kept happening, and we have not seen anything concrete until a bill was introduced by Senator Wyden and Representative Clark during the pandemic, because they saw the issue of having difficulties getting the manufacturers to the side of the hospitals to fix the equipment, etc. So this was totally focused on COVID, but did not have time to be discussed. And the OEMs objected, some OEMs objected, and it was not voted. But the idea started to, let's say, catch attention. The remanufacturing piece that I mentioned before, the FDA's draft guidance was issued by the FDA thinking what's the best way to make sure that services are not infringing into the field of remanufacturing when you may or may not be totally aware of what's happening there. So what they suggested is a pretty complicated flowchart, but the bottom line is that except when you are following exactly the OEM instructions, you have to use that flowchart after each service to determine whether there is a likelihood that you made any significant changes to the specifications, both in terms of safety as well as performance of that piece of medical equipment. And this has to be reviewed and signed off by a supervisor. So this created quite a bit of concern for both in-house as well as independent service organizations, because our estimate is that for a 400-bed hospital with 7,500 pieces of equipment, you would need 3,000 hours per year or 1.5 FTE for this extra work. Okay, this is not a simple thing. And there's another significant issue here is whether the supervisor is actually competent and either on site or remotely can monitor what was happening. And on top of that, there is a critical question is that, do you really have access to the specifications and testing protocols and tools to verify the specifications? So I, being a dumb knucklehead, in a conversation that we had with the director of the FDA's CDRH, I asked a question. I said, I'm not a lawyer. I'm actually just a naturalized citizen of the United States. So my difficulty understanding what you guys are asking us to do is the following. If you accuse me of violating the Constitution of the United States, but don't let me read the Constitution, so how can I know that I violated the Constitution? Isn't this similar to the case that manufacturers, some manufacturers, not all manufacturers, refuse to give you the specifications, the test procedures, the PM procedure, review procedures, etc. And then they say, well, you've ventured into remanufacturing because you did something that is not allowed and you modify the safety and performance specifications. So we really need to have this thing clear that, hey, if you want us to do this correctly, you need to give us the basics. We're not asking you for the entire software code to see how your machine works. That's not our case here. We are not trying to copy anyone's machine, okay? Anyway, so the other problem that we have detected recently is the cybersecurity. As you know, this is becoming a real serious public health problem in the United States. Ooh, okay. Yeah, I know. So the FDA issued a discussion document say, hey, we need to start looking into this because devices can indeed introduce risk of cybersecurity to the entire network of the system. Not so much with the purpose of sabotaging a particular or injuring a particular patient, but to really gain the so-called ransomware, right? So they made several definitions of challenges, opportunities here, and one particular one is that the so-called privileged access. Very few people should have the privilege to access the operating system, including the diagnostic and calibration software that we need to service equipment. Now, this is in theory very good, however, creates a concern because now we are seeing more and more manufacturers saying, wait a minute, we cannot let you access the software, diagnostics, and calibration because this will be vulnerable to cybersecurity attacks. Okay, so we're saying, wait a minute, that is nice for you to think about that way. However, we still have to think about the current number of so-called equipment that is so-called legacy devices that are still using Windows XP, Windows 2000, etc., etc. What we're going to do with them. So we did a quick back of the envelope estimate. There are probably between 2.4 to 5.8 million pieces of equipment valued in terms of replacement, 30 to 70 billion dollars, including in our government, Veterans Administration, military hospitals. So who is going to pay for this? Taxpayers. Yeah. Do we have money to? We are already in serious deficit situation, and so we really need to think about a more creative way. Otherwise, we are giving license to this Mr. Bond to just go out to kill us. Okay. So another important progress is the Library of Congress that the computer programs that contain in the devices and control the function of devices can have its secrecy or access bypassed to allow diagnostic maintenance and repair. This is a decision by the Copyright Office, which is subordinate to the Library of Congress. And so it's legal to do that, even the OEM does not permit. Now, how to do that is a different story. It's not as trivial, obviously. Okay, but this is only legal to the best of my understanding. Kevin can clarify that better later. That this is legal for the owner of the equipment, but not for third parties that are servicing that piece of equipment. And also, a software company cannot find a way to do this and then sell that piece of software to somebody else. So this is a pretty tricky thing here. But some manufacturers and their associations have sued in the court against this law and in this decision, this rule. And so far, they have lost the first instance. They are appealing right now, so we don't know. So there are some issues here that we really need to be careful about. So cybersecurity is now a big deal, as you know, in the whole country. There are some laws that are being prepared, and so we will probably see some movement in that area. Another one is the right to repair for motor vehicles was another law that was introduced by a representative Neil Dunn from Florida. And this is new. This has not yet been thoroughly discussed or voted anything yet, but there are more movements at the federal level as well. So what's going to happen in the future? Unfortunately, I think this is going to be a fairly prolonged war. This is not just an individual thing that you can do in one state or the federal government. Okay, there are several organizations that are against us, and there are some manufacturers that are actually willing to stand on our side. You know, so we have my friend Wang here, who has clearly stated that he is in favor of the right to repair, although he said that it should come with some conditions. But it's a matter of discussion and try to see whether we can find a way to do things together. But we are trying to work with the Congress, with the Food and Drug Administration, as well as the Federal Trade Commission. And so I'm going to run quickly. This is also happening in Canada. There is a particular province, territory in Canada that is doing this at the provincial level. The European Union has the, not that they don't call right to repair, but they call the instructions for use that has the service information, etc., included, but they don't have, unfortunately, the access to the diagnostic and calibration software. And may be interesting for some of you to know, China, that we think of a country that is copying our stuff and trying to violate other people's copyright. They are actually requiring manufacturers there to provide the service information to their service companies there. Okay, my view is that this is more about money than about safety. although this has been stated many times as a safety issue. And we are not trying to defeat anyone. We are trying to find ways that we can collaborate. At the end of the day, we are trying to achieve what the auto shops have achieved, is that you can go to a Pep Boys or whatever and buy a decoder to see what's the red light on your car telling you and what you need to replace, what you need to fix. That's all we are trying to do. So, hey, please get into this fight. We need help, okay? And we want to get the public involved. Previously, Trevor Noah did a episode on the comedy channel about this. Hopefully you can watch. And maybe we can invite this fellow here from Ukraine, that he can be very effective in helping us get some public sympathy here. Thank you. Kevin, all yours.
Thanks, Binseng. Yeah, so I mean, we'll go to questions here in a second. I would say, at the state level, right, that's been one of our main focuses, because getting anything through Congress these days is incredibly difficult. So we're turning to the laboratories of democracy. We've seen some legislation, as Binseng mentioned, in California. We made some significant progress. We're able to get the California Hospital Association on board, which we think is critical to moving any sort of state legislation, is getting your state hospital association, because that's who legislators are going to turn to and ask. So starting to have conversations with your own departments, and not only your departments, but with your leadership at your organizations, to tell them to kind of pass that word along and push your local hospital association. That's a key thing you can do. This year we've got a couple places that have introduced right to repair legislation. Delaware, there's a bill that is cleared to committee. So we're hoping that we'll continue to develop some support. Actually, our champion there is a legislator, Republican named Ruth Briggs King, who spent her career in the medical field. So she understands, and she's been a really effective champion. We also think that we'll have some legislation in North Carolina coming down the line. There's a couple other places too, but we're hoping we can continue to build on the state progress. So, I mean, as far as what you can do to get involved, right? That's one way to do it, right? To Binseng's point about this being like there are multiple fronts that we're pushing on, right? We are pushing in every venue that we can find in order to get this done. One of which is the Federal Trade Commission, right? They have the authority given to them by Congress to take action if there are consistent anti-competitive practices that companies are engaging in. And so this is actually something we've partnered with TechNation and MD Publishing to start to record these, right? At moments where you are dealing with a manufacturer who is refusing to sell you a part, or they are refusing to get you what you need, if they are misrepresenting what they actually have available, right? Maybe they're, I've heard from a lot of people that often they will cite FDA regulations, ask what those regulations are. But most importantly, what you can do is you can just have this site bookmarked and fill it out as soon as it happens. So what we ask for on the site is a few things, right? We ask for your name, your information, etc. We will not make this available to the public without your permission. So feel confident. That's a huge issue. We know we don't want to lead to any retribution or anything like that. So this is an anonymous survey unless you give us permission to talk to folks. And then what we have is we have listed out a number of different kinds of anti-competitive behavior that can be a violation of antitrust and of antitrust law. So we ask you to try and identify which one of those they fall into. And then most importantly, there's an opportunity to upload documentation, evidence, proof, et cetera. At the end of the day, we need the receipts, right? If we're going to go to the Federal Trade Commission and say, this is something that's happening from this manufacturer, we need to prove it. And we wouldn't want to, as an organization, as PIRG, right? We don't want to be telling stories that aren't true, right? Facts are incredibly important, especially these days. So we want to make sure the facts and the proof we have to go and make these kind of claims. But the simple act of having this and then recording and reporting incidents is a huge way that you can help, so that we can start to build up a knowledge base, a database of examples of anti-competitive behavior, and we can take it to the FTC, we can take it to lawmakers to show, just showing data of this is happening and that it has that impact, et cetera. And we can also, if you're willing to share your story with the media, right? Winning in the court of the public opinion has been key to our progress so far, right? In every opportunity we have to share stories of the impacts of repair restrictions on your ability to do your job, on the patients that you serve, that's a great way to win over the public.